Hello, it's Sammy here, and today I'm delighted to be joined by former Charlton and West Ham professional footballer, now author of Soccology, and clinical consultant and psychotherapist, Kevin George. First of all, Kevin, thank you for coming onto the channel.
Yeah.
And first of all, I just wanted to ask, during lockdown, how have you just adapted your work to be just at home? Because I'm guessing some small things have been tweaked.
Yeah, obviously I go out and see clients, but outside of that, I'm just at home anyway. So this is normal for me. And a part of me, I'm actually loving it because I'm catching up on work that I need to catch up on. And I'm executing on plans that I've wanted to do. So I've launched an e-school.
Mhm.
So it's great. Like today, I actually forgot to go for my walk. So something I need to do, but I've been so engrossed in what I'm doing that by the time we reintegrate, my to-do list would have been completely gone. I would have achieved so much. So yeah, I've taken to it comfortably.
And I just wanted to take you back to when you decided to hang up your boots and retire from football. Do you remember the day that you thought, I'm stepping away from football? Or was it just a more like long-term thing where gradually you just became to that point?
That's a very good question. So I hung up my boots from football years before I actually hung up my boots from
Oh,
football. And because emotionally I just wasn't invested in it anymore. I just did it because I didn't really know any other job to do. But because I didn't enjoy my time in it, I kind of fell out of love. But I stayed in it because you have to earn a living. That was all I knew. So and I can't remember. So the time officially, I'm gonna say about 2004, 2000, about 2005. No, I think about 2005. Yeah, I stopped playing.
and what was the point where you became, emotionally just like not invested into it? Was it like a moment, or was it just a gradual process?
I didn't realize until I reflected. So when I reflected, I realized it was when I left Alan Kirbishley's office after he said he's not going to give me a new contract. I didn't know at the time, but when I look back, I'm like, that wasn't the time it happened, but that was like, I would say the highlight of that, the peak of me kind of falling out of love with it, because my attitudes in terms of my work rate and all that stuff changed after that moment.
And when you left football, I heard you say that you stumbled across psychology and making notes for it years down the line. At that point, did you just think, like, that's football, that's done, like, I'm not going to really go into something related to football? Or was it maybe in the back of your mind you were always thinking about something like the book that you've written?
Um, so I set up a business that provided support in schools, and I was only thinking about that. And then once I settled, I was always looking at ways that I could somehow be involved in football again. And I wasn't really sure. And then obviously I designed the psychology programs, but they weren't psychology programs initially. And they grew into that. So once I saw little gaps, and obviously I had my friends who were still playing, still spoke to people at the Premier League, the PFA and that, I kind of, I started to deliver these programs at the clubs, then realized actually, you know, the people at the Premier League are benefiting, but what about the people who don't play at the Premier League and the lower leagues? What about the people at grassroots? So that's where I came at the idea of the book. But I think I've always wanted to write a book because it's an achievement anyway. But I became more driven by my passion to help others as just before I started it, basically.
And I heard you say that, like, when you were playing football, you probably weren't as arrogant enough, or you were maybe just a bit too nice to play football. Why do you think you were that way inclined?
You've done your research. I like that. Listen, you should be proud of yourself. I go to do a lot of interviews and people are kind of asking questions and they've not done their digging, but I like that. Because we've been taught to be humble. And I feel that being humble creates a safe space for others. So we keep pushing this narrative out. But actually, you push that out, it's difficult to survive in intense environments like football. It's unapologetic. So I feel, some people might say I'm not, but I feel I'm humble. But I needed more arrogance. I needed that arrogance. I know some footballers who made it because they were arrogant, and that powers up the behaviour. You know, when we look at our state of mind, the condition that we're in, you know, if you believe, people say, oh, your posture, stand up, your thoughts become what you are. I do think it's cheesy because they don't go into depth, but actually on a scientific level, it actually is true. And I think because I was too humble, what I'd done is when I should be voicing concerns or when I felt that I was hard done by, I internalized it instead of actually going and speaking to the staff when I was hard done by. And to which, this wasn't something that I fabricated because I spoke to one of my coaches recently about it. And he actually said, I nearly got into fights basically with other staff because of how I was treated. So I feel that I should have been more arrogant. And it's something that I think there's a level of arrogance that all footballers need to have. And I speak to my friend about it. Funnily enough, one of my friends spoke about this and he said that at Charlton, he kind of got it dampened down in him because when he did step up, they shut him down because it's so confusing. For a young player, they want you to be a man, they want you to have this character, but when you get mistreated, when you step up and embrace that character, they push you back down. It's like, you need to be this. And then when you're this, it's like, who do you think you are? So it's so confusing. So me and this guy, we're having a laugh because we're saying if we embrace it now, I mean, he's got a company that's very successful. I ended up doing loads of things since because we've embraced that character now, because it's not just football. In the real world, you need a certain type of arrogance because people then believe in you because you believe in yourself and etc. So, I always say balance. And in the book, I actually talk about this in a segment about football personalities. There are some guys who are too arrogant and it spills over and they can't control it. So it's about balance, being able to identify yourself, the good and the bad, and where you need to up it more. So if you are too arrogant, okay, do you know what? I need to humble myself a bit. But don't just take on this generalized approach because we're unique individuals. Your approach should also be unique for you to flourish.
And do you think arrogance is portrayed worse than it should be in the media? It's almost mismarketed.
Massively. Arrogance is mismarketed, anger is mismarketed, anxiety is mismarketed, mental health is mismarketed. And I always say, when you look at human performance and you look at emotion, it's the PE of society. So, in schools, what we do is we have the hierarchy of education, math, science, and English, and then we have PE. And what will happen is, especially in primary school, teachers aren't comfortable and confident teaching PE. So they will use it as a punishment. They'll say to children, if you don't behave, you're going to miss PE. You will never say, if you don't behave, you're going to miss maths. Now, if they're behind on the other subjects as well, they will also substitute PE to kind of do a catch-up. Now, what will then happen is in the news over time, you'll hear about these obesity rates. But we don't take it serious because we can see where the government put money. And also you can see where we put our attention. And it's the same with mental health. It's like, okay, everyone, let's talk.
Yeah.
But actually, when I work in the schools and I see students being very aggressive because they can't control their emotions, and the school know why, because it's trauma from home, they know why, they're still going to expel that student, and all this stuff's still happening. So I just think we need to be more accountable. And I just feel that at the moment, I just don't think things are being taken as seriously. And unfortunately, I always say this to people, that real change comes from conflict, and I feel that we avoid conflict. That's part of the problem. But when you look in history and all the great achievements that people have achieved, we celebrate all these great people every year, the same people, all come from conflict. And actually, in this day and age, the conflict I'm referring to is not even putting your life on the line. It's not fighting. It's actually just standing up to someone saying, listen, I don't agree with what you've done there, and here's why. These are the reasons. Worst case is you lose your job. That's the ultimate worst case. I'm not even saying that is the case. I work independently. Part of this reason is because I want to have integrity and I don't want to put myself in that position. So if people are in that position, I'm not judging them for it. I'm just saying, for me, I would find it difficult knowing that I'm part of a system that is actually doing wrong. I think a lot of times people talk themselves out of the guilt. They say, okay, well, I'm doing my bit, but you're still part of the system that that's doing wrong. So, yeah.
And talking about the mismarketing of things, how do you obviously it's just it's something that's not an easy fix, not a quick fix, but what is like probably the first step in trying to rectify it somehow?
Good question. In terms of the mismarketing, well, I can only speak for myself. So I always talk about taking control and being accountable. So that means making sure I'm on point and making sure that when I'm in the space and I use my voice, i.e. platforms like yours, or when I go anywhere else, it's actually really talking and approaching that subject and explaining why. So I talk about this quite often, and I wrote blogs on it, my books on elements of that. I'm just using football to have this conversation. So it's just about actually being vocal, to be honest. And I talk about this in the football space and with broadcasters. I always say, look, challenge your friends. I have some friends around me, and these are guys that I grew up with in terms of my friends who became footballers. They were brutal, but at the end of the day, it shaped me. And I think even now, like I've got friends who are authors, but the guy that I checked in with my book before I published it, he's never wrote a book in his life. On paper, it's probably like the last person you would ask, but I knew that I would get his unapologetic view, and I think that's really important. So going back to what you were saying, it's like, okay, well, how can we change this marketing? Is we are in circles where people are doing stuff or having certain views, and we should be able to say, do you know what, I don't agree with that. Here's why, instead of avoiding that situation. And you could actually change their thought process, or they could actually change yours, because we can't just assume that we're right. So it's about having those conversations and having those micro conflicts.
And just going back to after you'd retired, writing Soccology, I said, well, you've said that you took years of notes. How did you transfer those notes to actual write it down on paper? Because it's one thing having notes, one thing actually writing the book.
Yeah, it was the worst process ever. I would never recommend it to anyone. So what I'd done is I was making notes, going to conferences, taking bits from papers, but I was never serious about writing the book. You speak to people, everyone says they're going to write a book and they just don't. And it was when I was going to do some work in a prison, and I met this lady who had written a book, and I was like, oh, that was it. That was like the last hurdle. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. So I went in to all these files that I have on my laptop. And if you imagine going into your bedroom with all your clothes everywhere, and you're trying to pick an outfit out, that's what I had to do for a chapter. Or I know that I wrote this paragraph, and there was some notes that I wrote, and it was really key to getting this point across. But I've got all these files that I've got to search through, so it took a very long time. And then once I started it was a long process. Once I started to organize the notes, I had this smart idea to then interview all these footballers. And I never planned to do that in the first place. So altogether, it was like 45 footballers, a senior partner from KPMG, a psychophysicist, 2 coaches and a manager. So that's basically 50 people on average. There were people I met up with in person. A lot of them were recorded phone calls or Skype calls. So it was about 100 hours that I had to transcribe. So it's 100 hours actually, obviously I had to do these conversations, and then I had to sift through all these conversations as well. So yeah.
And for you, after you'd done it, there must have been like a satisfaction, like after the book had been published, after everything had been done, like a crazy level of satisfaction.
It's one of the best things I've ever done. I mean, what I love is I've invested all that time and effort into that piece of work, and that work will live forever. I mean, I got told that book now is going to be in a capsule. I think it's beneath the British Library to preserve English culture. So that's something that I can, my daughter's going to know, my grandkids. I've got a legacy. Whereas you can do work. I mean, I've worked, as I said, prisons, football clubs, schools, and it's brilliant. You can change someone's life, and you won't see them or whatever. But I've got this book now. That book lives on, So it's unbelievable, especially coming from someone who didn't read in school, and someone who my grades were absolutely appalling. So for me to write a book and to become, it's an Amazon #1 bestseller, it's unbelievable.
And when you were speaking to the players, the coaches, all the people that you collated for the book, what was the first response from them? The initial response from them, was it they all wanted to get on board, or was there some people that were a little bit hesitant in getting involved?
Yeah, there were a few that were hesitant, that agreed, and they pulled out because I made it very clear. I said, look, this is a book about depth. This isn't about service level stuff like, oh, what was it like playing at this club, or what was it like? And it's just, I said, we're going to go deep. And because naturally as human beings, we're so used to having surface level conversations. Oh, how's the weather? And, we don't want to be seen as being invasive. So it was really difficult to even with the conversations that I had with these players, I really learned some important journalistic skills through the process, because I spoke to some players and I was thinking, oh, actually, I've not really got anything from this. So when I said to players, listen, we are going to go deep. If you're not willing to have the conversation, let's not have it. I'm not going to use you just because of your name. I want someone to read this and say, okay, wow, this is what I'm going through. There are players who are going through neglect, different types of abuse, bullying from the club, all sorts of stuff. And I want them to read that and say, do you know what? Okay, I can relate. I don't feel alone now. And actually, I can have this conversation with someone, because I was unable to articulate it myself, but actually, I can almost just paraphrase this to explain it to somebody. So, as I said, so I had a few that pulled out, but most engaged willingly, because it's like, wow, this connected with me. And when I get the feedback from the players, it's unbelievable. I mean, I was working with a group of young people earlier on Zoom, and they was like, I don't even read books, but I read this. And they were trying to explain how they connected with the experiences and with the players, etc. So it's doing the work.
When you were a player, was it almost like you didn't think about that side of the game, or was it more after you've had time to reflect?
Yeah, I didn't have a clue. It was when so I'm someone, I'm not afraid to try different things. I've always been, it's almost like a bit of, I wouldn't say strange, but I was just a different one growing up, and it was weird because I would get the mickey taken out of me, but I know that my friends slightly respected me because of it too. So when I came out of football, set up the business school in schools, I used to hear whispers about certain books that were amazing. So as I said, I never had a good relationship with education, and books to me were linked to education. So I didn't really have a good relationship with reading. So I remember reading some books. So first one, which was Rich Dad Poor Dad. So that gave me the belief to set up my own business, because I didn't believe someone like me could, because Hollywood had business owners that just didn't look like me. I didn't connect with in any way. So that's that. And because I got so much out of that book, it encouraged me to start reading other books. And I read Change Your Life with NLP by Lindsay Agnes, and I thought, wow. And when I read that book, I started the courses on NLP. And then around this time, the head of welfare at the PFA said, oh, you should look into counselling. It's a brilliant course. And when I looked into that, I was like, amazing. So then while I'm doing these studies, what happens is, as part of your studies, you've got to self-reflect anyway, but the processes just happen. So I start looking at myself, my family and my friends, all the things that have happened, my relationship with education, with football, and I started to just see things differently. And I thought, oh my God. And this is how I ended up creating Soccology. I started to realize, well, actually, I was at these Premier League teams, but no one actually knows what they're doing to an extent. You watch football pundits, they're pretty much saying the same thing, just regurgitating or assuming things. There's no real specifics. I thought there's a massive gap here. And there's not really many people who are qualified in human behavior who were in the system. So I thought I've got a niche, and I'm gonna attack that.
And once, as I mentioned, once you published the book, was there like an itch to keep on publishing books, writing different types of books? It might not be a football book, it could be something else, but there was just that itch.
Yes. So right now, I've started about 6 books.
Wow.
I've started 6, and my second book, I would say, how far am I into finishing it right now? I'm gonna say I'm past halfway. So I've done the research.
Mm-hmm.
I'm past halfway of writing my second book right now. If I didn't launch this new e-score and all these other stuff, it would have been nearly done, especially during this situation. And I'm hoping within the next, say, week to 2 weeks, that I can actually throw myself back into it. So I haven't touched my second book in about a month, but I can't wait. This one is nothing to do with football. This one's about street culture. It's about gangs. It's about how all of us as a system contribute to the misfortunes of life, basically. So I can't wait. I can't wait. It's going to be amazing.
For that book you just mentioned, how did you come about the research for that? Because it's not like as easy as you go to this person, you go to that person. There must be like a deeper layer of conversation person that you go to.
Do you know what? I mean, I grew up in a rough area, so like my friends were killing people. My friends were people I know are being killed, selling drugs. And it's the typical story when you hear people who get into a spotlight, they grow in a city. They always say, I grew up in a tough area. But something I always used to hear was like, oh, your mum did a great job. And I was like, my mum did do a great job, but it wasn't just that. And also, what was the job? Okay. And this is what psychology was about. It's about specifics. Okay, I want to know, okay, so what was it about my mum that equipped me for when I was out on the street? And I think one of the biggest things that my mum gave me was responsibility from young. So I could be out on the street and my friends, and again, so my network was so strong for the wrong reasons. And I could easily go astray. But because I was given responsibility from a young age and the relationship I had at home, so I didn't feel judged at home. I could speak to my mum about absolutely anything. Nothing was off limits. I mean, nothing. And so because of that, I can bounce ideas off her. I can check in with her. I didn't need to go outside to do anything like, get respect or attention for somebody else. I had it at home. Whereas the guys that I knew that were doing the wrong things, they were doing it to get attention. They were doing it to get loved, So I thought, okay, so, and in the book, I don't want to say too much, but I go into that in finer detail. And then I look at the link between emotions and how mental health is uniquely played out in street culture, So I thought, okay, I'm going to do a book on this. Literally, I can just dig into my childhood to provide loads of that information. Obviously, I've done loads of research too, but even when I talk about the networks, and especially when I work in schools, I just say to them, look, a lot of these kids don't have choices. When I grew up, my primary school, like by the time we was getting towards the end of primary school, I had friends who were in gangs. My football teams, they were filled up with gangs. My mum's friends' kids, you hear all the rumours on the streets, oh, this one stabbed this one, that. And I'm hearing the street names. Then I find out, oh, it's Michael. I've known him from. And so that's the situation. But a lot of people are unaware of this. And also a lot of people who grew up around me in that space, they get older and it's almost like they get amnesia in a way. And I'm saying to them, but you know about this because you grew up in the system. You can't just say, oh, these kids, they must stop stabbing each other. No, you should be looking at it thinking, well, why was my friends doing that? And why was I around them? Because also there were certain situations, and I was laughing with some of my friends the other day. I was saying, we were going to places knowing that it was going to be absolutely mayhem. Mm-hmm. Why on earth were we going there? But as young people, a part of it is the excitement around it too. So yeah, I mean, with this book, I delve into that. I use celebrities as examples because those are stories that we could all connect to. And it links in a way to the player premium chapter in Soccology, because that is how football benefits from gangs and things like that. So, but yeah, that's that.
And for you, talking about gangs and you're talking about that in Soccology, how football can benefit from that gang culture.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that's always been important to you to write about, to express?
I wanted to highlight that point.
Mm-hmm.
But as I got older, it became more important because I started to be aware of more footballers that were in prison, and I started to be more aware in general. So probably when I was younger, I thought that there was a lack of cultural understanding, and actually it made it worse. So I think my passion for it just grew, to be honest with you, because I just felt like as the adult in the space, you are the professional, whether you're a teacher or whether you're a football coach. So for you to say I've got an attitude, you don't know what I'm going through. I'm not born bad. I'm not born, with predisposed to be stuck up or whatever it is. If I've got an attitude and you're qualified to work in that space, you should be curious as to why I'm behaving that way. I'm not saying that you just accept it, especially if you're working, you've got a group to work with. You can discipline the person. You can do so many things, but there's a way of managing it. To literally just dismiss that person, you're just another adult now who's done that, and that's going to send that person on a warpath. I've seen the same pattern play out over and over again. So I feel I'm really passionate about it. And this is why I did the player premium chapter. And this is why I'm going to do this book to say, look, we've got prisons that are full. We've got young people who are getting expelled all the time. And we're not doing enough, obviously, because the stats are there. And this is why. So this book is going to be about why and a solution as well.
Yeah. But for you personally, is when you're writing, are you targeting a certain group of people? Or is it just, you know, this can be open to everyone who've had their certain experiences or are going through it right now?
It's open to everyone. And that's something that I struggle with, because when you do books in an ideal world, you're supposed to pick a group. So when I did Soccology, it's like, okay, so who's this targeted at? And I was like, I don't really want to answer that, because then I would dismiss other people out of reading it. So for example, if you're a parent, you may have a child who's a footballer, but that person might not be able to communicate how they feel or don't want to. So when you say, oh, how did it go? All right. Because I work with parents, that's what they say. So parents will say, okay, I'm going to support my child by watching them, but they're just there. They don't understand the game, so you can't really be there for your child. So Soccology is there. It breaks the whole game down and the person's experience as a player. If you're a coach, you get to understand people from different backgrounds. You get to understand the game and football intelligence and develop. And if you're a player, it's a bit similar to the coach in a way, but you also get to understand the process you're going through, and also to be able to relate to the players who are there too. So I think for me, it's like, if you are a football stakeholder, the book's for you. So same for the fans. They invest so much in terms of time and money. They want to know what's going on with these players that they support. So now with this new book, you know, ideally the main groups would be people who are in charge of groups or decision makers. So for example, teachers, if you're a football coach, if you're a youth worker, if you're a social worker, if you work in the government, because actually these are people that make key decisions in terms of whether it be legislation, whether it be behavior management, you know, whether they, you know, they're going to expel someone, you know, these are really important decisions. So it's for them, and also for the young people, because I know for a fact that a lot of the people I knew growing up who's doing the wrong things, they actually didn't understand why they were doing it, you know, and it's only when you see when they're older, you speak to them, and there's loads of videos on YouTube, you hear these old guys talking, oh, you know what, when I went through this is why I was doing it. It'll be great if we can get them to be aware way before they've done all these years in prison and all this other stuff that they've done.
Just going back to Soccology and what some of the stories that it mentioned, if you relate it to now, footballers, how do you think, you know, something that's really like hot on topic right now is like criticism that footballers have been facing. How do they respond to that sort of criticism, or if it's from football people like punditry, or is it government? How do they respond? What can they do to interpret?
What criticism are you talking about?
I'm talking about, like, I'll start on like Graeme Souness, for example, or Pogba. What does Pogba do in that situation? Because he's not doing anything wrong, but of course he's getting that sort of criticism for not really actually anything that's his fault. What can he do in terms of in that situation?
It's going to be difficult with this, for example, with this Souness Pogba situation, because the spotlight is on Pogba. So he's going to lose because he's the player. There's an expectation of shut up and play, and there's more interest in him than Souness. So unfortunately for the footballers, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. And that's why a lot of players actually don't like ex-players, because one, there's an expectation that they should know better. And two, they don't realise that they're paid to give their opinion, but it doesn't mean it has to be a negative one, you know? But the problem that we have with former players, and I think the older they are, the worse they get, is that there's a judgment based upon the time when they played, where it's almost like you're a robot. But unfortunately, the game's changed and life's evolved. So someone like Pogba, using him as an example, like, okay, regardless of the team that you're in, you know, you're expected to do this, and that's it. And even if he doesn't respond, it's like, okay, he's got a bad attitude. And the problem that we have is, well, how do we know he has a bad attitude? How are you making that call? Oh, it's the body language. Yeah. That's so subjective. What does that body language... Someone can say, right now, I've got bad body language, you know? And I feel at least be trained in that if you're going to make that judgment, that call. because what happens is all these people are watching and you're influencing how they think, and the press runs with that, and then that just makes his life stressful. So there's so many avenues I can go with it. I would say personally that players can either do one or two things: just don't react at all, or they should do a collective. How I am as a person, I just think, you know what, take control, do a collective, and that collective releases statements on behalf of the player. You know, because really you can break down all these pundits that criticize the players. I don't mean, you know, if they have a bad performance or whatever, but I think with Souness, there's some unhealthy attachment to Pogba. And if you break it down, I haven't had time, but what I've done is actually I've got a text of some of the things that he said. Danny Mills actually attacked him too. Yeah. And what I was going to do is actually break down the whole text and highlight how basically there's no foundation to what they're saying. So, but I just haven't had time to do that yet.
For you, when you, as when you were a player, obviously every player is different, but how did you personally respond to coaches or people within the club criticizing you for things that probably you shouldn't be criticized for?
I struggled. This is what goes back to what I was saying about the arrogance, because it's like a shield. It can just bounce off of you. So I remember there were a couple of times where I was just really angry, and I can't remember why. And I just played really well because I was consumed by the anger. So there was no space for self-doubt, you know? And then there was a time when I just got fed up, when I thought, okay, you know, my coach is doing this. It affects how I play. That means I don't deserve to be in the first team. So it's like, do you know what? I don't care. And then when I developed the I don't care attitude, not I don't care so people can see that, it was internally, I thought, oh, do you know what? I don't care. I was the best player, because all of a sudden there was no space for self-doubt. There was no space for me to feel sorry for myself. There was no space for this overwhelming anxiety. It was the arrogance that I spoke about in a way. It's like, do you know what? I'm just going to do my thing. So.
And when you talk about like that, the anger, how should players channel that? Because everyone talks about like, oh, he has like an attitude problem or something on the lines of that. And you talk about how you channeled anger and you performed to your best. Is that for most players, would you say? Obviously you can't speak for most of them, or for all of them, but for you personally, in your experiences, have you seen players that have that almost that fire? They almost perform to their capability.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I was saying internally. So when I talk about arrogance, you can have it externally too, as long as it's not detrimental to relationships or making people feel bad. There's players who have that too. I think it's brilliant. I see it as a skill. The personality is a skill. So I would just say that, yeah, as long as you can have it and manage it, I think it works. For me, someone like Jermaine Defoe, he had it. Jerome Thomas had it. Obviously, I worked at Man City when Jadon Sancho was there. Jadon has it. Phil Foden as well, he has it. But I've also worked with players who, on the surface, I wouldn't say they have it, but they've also been successful too. Tyrese Campbell, I wouldn't say he was at Stoke in England under 20s. I wouldn't say that, you know, he had the level of arrogance as the others. However, I've worked with him in the classroom space. I haven't worked with him on the training pitch, so I don't know. And this is what I was talking about internally. The first group I mentioned, they're externally arrogant too, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I think sometimes people judge those people and they might say, oh, they're arrogant in a negative way, but that's because it forces them to reflect and maybe makes them feel uncomfortable. So, yeah.
And finally, I just wanted to touch on the Premier League restart and the project restart. You heard like Sergio Aguero come out and say that some of the players maybe are scared to come back. You've seen that the Premier League, they're going to warn clubs that their situation might worsen if they don't vote for playing on neutral grounds, the bottom six. When you see statements come out like that, do you think that the Premier League are just not looking out for the players and it's more of a just filling a quota in terms of like the broadcasters?
Yeah, there's a lot of money involved, and that's what it comes to, you know. I mean, and that's not just the Premier League; it's the government as well. Like in terms of when we come out of lockdown, because if the money drops to certain levels, and when we go into recession, which we're pretty much going to go into, we're going to lose people anyway for other reasons. But So I think it's about money of the Premier League, but I think the players need to be brave. If that's the case, get together. You hold the power.
Yeah.
The Premier League can't do anything if you all get together. But I think sometimes the players don't realise their power, and a few of them might say, "Oh, yeah, I don't really want to do it." No, get together as teams, communicate with the other teams. You know, you can do it through the captains, and say, "Look, this is our stance."
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
And do you think that the players will end up just being punished for it?
They will, but if they all do it, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, what are you going to do? The Premier League is the biggest league in the world, not because of the quality, it's because of the players. It's because they got the most internationals from the top teams here. They're here because of the billionaire owners. You go back to the 90s, we didn't really have players from Italy, Brazil, Spain here. And it's because of the money that came, then they came. So if they mistreat them, those players will be like, you know what, I don't want to be here. And then it will knock the money, the TV rights, everything will be affected.
And finally, Kevin, I just want to say, do you have anything else that you wanted to talk about, anything that's coming up for you? We've spoken about your books that are coming up. Is there anything else that's in the line?
No, it's literally, I've launched the e-school. So it's the mental health and emotional literacy online. So on Zoom to schools and football clubs, even companies as well. So that's kind of running at the moment. There's other bits, but I can't really announce them at the moment. So that's pretty much it. But I've enjoyed this. I was going to say, it's good. Like I said, at least you've done your research. And yeah. I tell you, you've put a lot of people to shame. I tell you.
Kevin, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming onto the channel. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Remember to check out Kevin's links, which will all be in the description below. And thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and see you.